CH.3 Working Homeless. I lived out of my truck when I got back to San Antonio, usually parking it behind a church after it got dark. One of the most stressful things you can do when you're living in a car is to drive around trying to find somewhere to park, especially when you're drunk. Everybody needs somewhere to go back to at night, a spot. It could be an empty parking lot, a friend's backyard, or $1 million mansion. The mind needs a place to relax. I've always felt safe at churches, and you avoid cops and criminals. They're the ones you gotta look out for. Them and snitches. My sunburn got better within a week, and 1999 was an unseasonably mild summer by Texas standards. I was homeless and unemployed, staying up all night smoking weed with my friends and scrounging up enough pocket money for gas and cigarettes. I slept in the bed of my truck, stared at the stars, peeled dead skin off my back, and listened to Buddy Holly on the AM Oldies radio station in my truck's factory radio. During June, I lived off stolen change from Michael's car and ate food I took from Mom's fridge when Guy wasn't home. A few days after the 4th of July, I got a day job working at an upscale hamburger joint, Chester's Hamburgers. Benny also helped me get a second gig washing dishes at the Little Caesars pizza place he worked. I was still sleeping in my truck behind the church, but at least I had two jobs. Each job was totally different with two unlike sets of employees on opposite sides of the social spectrum. The people at Little Caesars were cool, laid back, and easy to get along with. They worked to pay their bills. They worked because they had to. The kids at Chester's were aloof, stuck up, and treated individuals they considered inferior without respect. They worked because their parents suggested it. I hated working at Chester's, but Little Caesars had an environment I could relate to. The employees weren't working summer jobs like the kids at Chester's referred them as. It was the middle of summer, but the people at Little Caesars wouldn't have called it a summer job. My shift at Chester's was from 8 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon. When I was done flipping burgers, I had a short break before I had to be at Little Caesars. I was their only dishwasher, so my evenings were spent scrubbing dough off pizza pans. We'd wrap things up around midnight, and me, Benny, and the crew would head over to the manager's house to drink Bud Light, smoke swag blunts, and watch late night MTV. If I was too drunk to drive, I'd usually sleep in my truck parked in front of my manager's house. But most nights I'd leave before the sun came up and drive to my favorite church parking lot. Waking up at sunrise and going to work at Chester's sucked, and I'm the first to admit that I didn't have a positive attitude toward my more fortunate coworkers. I usually had been drinking all night, and even though I didn't get hangovers back then, waking up covered in dirt, sweat, and mosquito bites in a rusty pickup would have put anyone in a bad mood. The worst part about it was not shitting or showering before I had to be cheerful at a greasy hamburger joint with people who treated me like shit. I wasn't happy, but I knew employment was the only way out. Working yourself out of homelessness is the most common way to beat it. According to a New York City census that was published on the website for the Coalition for the Homeless in 2010, about 44% of the homeless in the United States have full-time jobs. 44%. The kids at Chester's knew each other from Churchill High School, one of the wealthiest schools in town. I'm pretty sure they didn't have many urgent bills to pay. They acted like I was invading their turf. With one look at my cheap shoes and rusty truck, they slapped a label on me. Labels prevent you from getting to know someone. You know the feeling you get when you walk into a room after a group of people have just been talking about you? I had that feeling every day at Chester's. The only part of my shift I enjoyed was when I went outside to wash the windows and doors with old newspapers. I take my time and read all the headlines while I polish the glass. It was the only time I didn't feel their stares and jokes. I've had over 100 jobs in my life, and most I left on my own recognizance. But Chester's was one of the few places that I actually got fired from. I was upset when they told me, but it wasn't because I got fired. I hated that job. I was pissed they fired me because I didn't fit in. Now that hurt my ego. It was much better with the crew at Little Caesars. They were from working class backgrounds and didn't drive cars their parents bought them. They didn't analyze my cheap shoes like the kids at Chester's. I'd hang out with the Little Caesars gang almost every night. We had food fights with the pizza toppings, gave our friends free pies, and smoked pot and drank beer in the walk-in freezer. By the time September came, I had saved enough for an apartment. I was ready to get out of my truck, but I still needed a cosigner. This took some persuading, but I managed to convince Mom to convince Guy to let her co-sign for me to get an apartment. I promised her I'd have the rent paid on time every month, but I knew it was going to be tough. The apartment was a few streets down from where Michael and I grew up. It was my first real place, but I never got comfortable. It felt like I was house sitting. Everyone I knew said it'd be a matter of time before I got kicked out. It was like I didn't deserve it, and my friends at the time only reinforced that idea. Knowing you, they'd always say. I enjoyed entertaining company in my new place. It felt like it did in Jonathan's garage. Michael had moved to our sister's duplex in Austin, but he still made the drive to San Antonio a couple times a week to stay at my place. We had our 20th birthday there. I was drunk, high on cocaine, and tripping on acid at the same time. The night started off slow with just a few losers hanging out in my living room, but then loads of people started to show up attractive blonde girls, friends with big bags of weed, and even a small motorcycle gang that lived down the street from Mom's house. My job at Little Caesars wasn't enough to cover rent, so Benny and I got a morning gig delivering newspapers in my truck. We were horrible carriers who broke windows, knocked over flower pots, and sent papers flying through wind chimes. You lose common sense delivering the newspaper, but some of the best times I ever had was throwing it. One Saturday night, my truck was having engine problems, so Benny asked his 80-year-old father to help us roll and deliver the big Sunday paper. We parked his red F-350 truck outside the balcony of my third-story apartment and threw papers over the ledge into the bed. The three of us rolled Sunday papers early into the morning while his dad told us spirited stories about the Great Depression, World War II, and being born during the Woodrow Wilson administration. That was like in the 19 teens, about 100 years ago. My apartment manager, 1917, I believe, Woodrow Wilson was president. My apartment manager got a bunch of late night calls from neighbors complaining. I was already in hot water due to my birthday party a few weeks earlier, and it felt like I'd be kicked out any day, just like my friends had predicted. By the time December came, I still hadn't been kicked out, but I couldn't stand living there anymore. Something didn't feel right. I was working two jobs and trying to keep up with what society told me. I could do the same thing for years and have nothing to show for it. It wasn't me. A wise man once said, "There's no dignity in a man who works 8 hours a day, not knowing what he's working toward." The vibe in the air during the last moments of the 20th century was bizarre. Everywhere you went, people were pulling their hair out, gnawing off the stubs of their fingers, and screaming Bible verses in street corners. Media outlets were implying a worldwide impact from the Y2K computer virus, and hordes of TV watching suburbanites were stocking up on bottled water and canned food. One of our sisters was going to Las Vegas for the Millennium, and she asked if I'd watch her duplex for a few days. I jumped at the chance and vowed to renounce the rat race. The next day, I emptied my apartment and dropped off all my furniture behind a Goodwill thrift store. I threw away just about everything I owned besides a few photographs, a couple journals, and a bunch of dog-eared paperbacks. It felt great being back in Austin, stomping around the drag. It was winter break and most students were back in their hometowns, but the drag rats were still milling up and down campus streets. I just read Hell's Angels by Hunter S. Thompson, and it inspired me to befriend as many of these gutter punks as I could. I plan to infiltrate the group of rebellious outcasts and find out more about the tribe of rebels. The homeless broods didn't accept me into their world at first. I was too clean cut. They thought I was a Trustafarian from the highbrow neighborhoods of Westlake or Tarrytown who got bored with his parents' money and decided to go slumming. When a few of them found out I was watching my sister's duplex for New Year's, their attitudes suddenly changed and I began bringing home the dirtiest kids in town. They were so filthy it took about 5 minutes for them to wreck the joint. They got my sister's new living room set covered in dirt, made a mess in the kitchen, and tracked mud in with their fake Doc Martens. I didn't start kicking a few of them out until I had found a used syringe in the toilet. A few of them stayed in the duplex leading up to New Year, and on New Year's Eve they invited a group of their more unsavory friends to join the party. We needed food and supplies, so we took my truck to the new suburban H-E-B grocery store they just built. It was overflowing with chaos, packed with crazies, stocking up on supplies. The drag rats took advantage of the disorder and filled their pockets with as much merchandise that fit. One of them walked out with a case of beer in each hand. Another hit of the meat department and stole hundreds of dollars worth of steaks. The only drag rat who refused to shoplift was a 16-year-old runaway named Autumn. Autumn was from a hardcore Christian town in East Texas. She moved to Austin to escape a sexually abusive stepfather and ended up downtown where the drag rats ate her alive. I felt bad for her. She hadn't become a drug addict until the drag rats turned her into a prostitute. There wasn't much I could do besides letting her know that there were people in this world who wouldn't hurt her. A little after midnight, someone busted out some purple microdot and we tripped acid in my sister's backyard until the sun came up. Everyone felt like they'd known each other for years, and everything was simple and clear. LSD will do that to you. It reveals all the mystical patterns of the universe, but by the time the sun comes up, your enlightened thoughts slip away, unnoticed. Before the Rose Bowl kicked off, I gotten rid of the last of the drag wraps from the duplex. My sister was due home that evening, and the place was a mess, so I spent the next few hours cleaning up. I did it half-assed with a smirk on my face, knowing that I couldn't get out every stain and had no explanation for anything missing. My sister got back that night, took one look at that duplex our father bought her, and told me to leave. I didn't have money or anywhere to go, but I had half a tank of gas, so I figured my best option was to drive to the day labor place on the other end of town and wait for them to open. I parked behind the strip mall, climbed into the bed of my truck, and went to sleep under the stars. There were a few other people sleeping in their vehicles waiting for the place to open too, but that's not an occasion when you yell out, "Howdy." The next day I woke up before dawn and got in line with all the other have-nots at the labor hall. I was the youngest guy there, but I had a truck, so I only had to wait a couple hours before I got sent on a job with a Latino named Raul. Raul didn't speak much English, but he was polite and supplied me with cigarettes all day. I shared my lunch with him. When we finished, Raul asked me for a ride to his motel. While I was driving him, he noticed a problem with my truck. He said it was the fuel filter and offered to fix it over some beer at his place. On the way there, I stopped at a Walmart for the car part and a case of Bud Light. Raul was staying at the kind of motel you see with tiny cabins you drive right up to and park outside. Most don't have paved lots, just dirt and gravel. You see a lot of cab drivers settle for these kind of rooms, but it's gotta be the bottom of the barrel as far as sleeping inside goes. My experience with these places is that some look bad from the outside, but they can be quite accommodating when you get through the door. This was not one of those places. Raoul's room smelled like unclean bodies and half-burnt cigarettes. There wasn't any carpet, only broken tiles and a layer of dust. He turned on the TV and told me to wait. I sat on his mattress, which was on the floor, and I watched an hour of Spanish television. For a moment, I told myself things were going okay. I was getting by and felt resilient. I even considered staying at the motel with my new friend Raul. He suggested it when we first arrived, saying me, him, and my Chevy truck would be the three amigos. Plans changed when Raul came back and busted out two things I didn't want to see. The first was a loaded crack pipe. I could have gotten past his drug use and might have even taken part, but then he whipped out his penis and I went running. He didn't just briefly expose himself, but he pulled out his crooked brown schlong and started swinging around the room like he was about to strike a piñata. I got in my truck and raced down I-35 back to San Antonio. I didn't want to run into Raul at the labor hall, and I didn't want to see any drag rats I'd hung out with on New Year's Eve. Neither would ever help me get any closer to achieving my goal of graduating from UT. Going back to San Antonio felt logical. I figured I'd have a better chance of finding a couch to sleep on there than I did in Austin. I heard Benny and Michael had gotten a one-bedroom apartment. Pretty good, huh? A one-bedroom apartment on the north side. I hadn't spoken to either of them in about a month, but I thought I'd stop by with some strong acid as a peace offering. It wasn't hard to find their new place. They moved into an infamous set of apartments the three of us used to terrorize years earlier when we were selling newspaper subscriptions door to door. Now there were residents there. They were happy to see me, and after a night of psychedelics, asked if I wanted to live there full time and pay rent. There were three of us in a one-bedroom apartment, and we each had a cat. The first night I brought my cat, Polly, over. Benny's cat, Mr. Anderson, impregnated her. Within a month, the apartment had 3 cats, 3 bastards, and a gang of kittens climbing the walls. It was a matter of time before things blew up. When it was just me and Michael, we talked trash about Benny. When it was just Benny and me, we talked smack about Michael. The cats didn't get along either. Their actions mirrored their owners, always hissing, clawing at each other. The apartment wasn't Benny's name, but I didn't think he'd kick me out. I was paying rent and we were friends. We weren't getting along, but we had known each other for years, so I was surprised when I came home from day labor one day and found he changed the locks and threw me and Michael's stuff in the bed of my truck. He decided to kick me, Michael, and our cats out so he could have a new friend move in. It wouldn't have been so bad, but Benny locked one cat out with her kittens still inside the apartment. They needed milk and were crying through the locked door. I was furious and started screaming for the neighbors' help, storming around the complex with my fists clenched. Polly was meowing like crazy, and I was yelling for God like a lunatic. When it got dark, I sat in my truck outside the apartments and waited for Benny. At midnight, it began to rain, and everything I owned got soaked. I didn't care. I was too upset about my inability to be a good owner to my pet. In the middle of the night, Polly crawled into my truck and cozied up next to me like she finally understood. That is Gonzo Education, Chapter 3, Working Homeless, Part 1. My name is Gregory Brandt. There's my picture on the back. This is my book. You can get it free on Amazon right now. Go ahead and type it in. If you like this, go ahead and write a review, fill in a comment, and I'm really proud of this. It's a true story. It starts when I drop out of high school and it ends when I graduate from one of the best universities in the United States. Received a degree in journalism, print journalism, which is nonfiction writing. Like I said, my book, it's a nonfiction memoir. And feel free to comment and tell me what you think.